Bella in the Wych Elm, 1943, England. Some mysteries don't begin with a body found on a roadside or a missing persons report filed at a police station. Some begin with 4 boys doing something they weren't supposed to be doing and stumbling into a nightmare they would carry for the rest of their lives. This one began in a forest, with a hollow tree and a skull staring back from inside it. It is 1943. England is at war. The Midlands countryside around Worcestershire carries on the way the English countryside always does, quietly, stubbornly, indifferent to the chaos happening across the channel. Villages have their routines. Farmers tend their fields, and boys, being boys, slip away from home to do things their parents have told them not to do. On April 18, 1943, 4 boys, Robert Hart, Thomas Willits, Fred Payne, and Bob Farmer, crept into Hagley Wood, a private estate belonging to Lord Cobham in Worcestershire. They were poaching, most likely looking for birds' eggs or small game. They weren't supposed to be there. They knew that. It made the whole thing feel like an adventure. Then one of them peered into the hollow trunk of a large Wych Elm tree, a species known for its wide gaping cavities, and saw something pale inside. Something that looked, at first glance, like it might be an animal skull. It wasn't an animal. Staring back from inside the hollow tree was a human skull, partially obscured by leaves and bark, still with strands of hair clinging to it. Stuffed, and that word is not chosen carelessly, stuffed into the narrow hollow of the tree, which was barely wide enough to accommodate a human body, was the skeletal remains of a woman. The boys ran. They swore each other to silence, terrified, as children are, of getting in trouble for being where they shouldn't. But Thomas Willits, the youngest of the group, couldn't keep it inside. He told his father that night, and by the following morning, the police were in Hagley Wood. What investigators found when they examined the Witch Elm was deeply troubling, even by the grim standards of wartime England. The remains were largely skeletal, indicating the woman had been dead for some time, likely between 1 and 3 years, putting her death somewhere around 1941. The skull had been pushed down into the hollow trunk in such a way that it could not have gotten there by accident, and could not have been placed there after death with ease. The body had almost certainly been forced into the tree, while still warm, while the flesh was still pliable enough to allow the cramming of a full human form into a space that barely fit it. A woman's shoe was found nearby, a gold wedding ring. Scattered bones, some of which had been dragged further from the tree, likely by animals, including hand bones found some distance away. And tucked inside the skull's mouth, investigators found a piece of taffeta fabric, rammed in so deliberately that there was no question someone had put it there. Some investigators believed this was the murder method itself, that the woman had been suffocated by the cloth forced into her mouth and throat before being hidden in the tree. She was approximately 35 years old, 5 feet tall. She had irregular teeth, slightly prominent. She had given birth at least once in her life. She had died most likely in late 1941. And nobody, not a single person in all of Worcestershire or anywhere else in England, came forward to say they knew her. This is where the case takes on its most haunting quality. In 1943, the mechanisms for identifying unknown bodies were limited, but they were not nothing. Police circulated descriptions. Dentists were contacted countywide to see if anyone matched her dental records. Missing persons files were searched. The wartime displacement of people across England complicated matters. The war had scattered families, disrupted records, moved populations, but even accounting for all of that, the silence around this woman was extraordinary. She was listed in official records simply as an unknown female, a Jane Doe in the English countryside. Then, sometime in 1944, roughly a year after the discovery in Hagley Wood, graffiti began appearing on walls across the West Midlands, on buildings in Birmingham, on a wall in Wolverhampton, scrawled in chalk or paint, showing up and disappearing and then reappearing somewhere else, was always the same message. WHO put Bella down the Wych Elm, and sometimes simply WHO put Bella in the Elm. The handwriting was never traced conclusively to a single person. The messages appeared too frequently, and in too many places to be dismissed as a single prankster's work, but whether they came from one person or many was never determined. What the graffiti did, however, was give the dead woman a name, or something like one. From that point on, she was Bella. Whether the name was real, whether whoever wrote it actually knew her identity, or whether it was simply a cruel piece of folklore attaching itself to an unsolved murder, no one could say. Bella in the Witch Elm. Bella in the Witch Elm. The phrase took on its own life. Investigators were not idle during this period. One theory that gained serious traction came from a wartime intelligence officer named Professor Margaret Murray, and later was expanded upon by others, that Bella may have been a victim of witchcraft. This was not as outlandish as it sounds in the context of 1940s rural England, where folk practices with dark roots still existed in isolated communities. The positioning of the body inside the tree, the cloth in the mouth, these details matched certain ritual practices associated with spells meant to silence the dead, to prevent a spirit from walking. The removal and scattering of the hand was consistent with what was called in local tradition a hand of glory, a severed hand used in occult ceremonies. This theory was taken seriously enough by investigators that it was never fully dismissed, though it was never proven either. Another theory, one that has persisted in different forms across the decades, connects Bella to wartime espionage. A Dutch woman named Clarabella Dronkers, whose husband was executed as a Nazi spy in England in 1942, was suggested as a possible match. A more developed version of this theory, promoted decades later by a woman named Una Mossop, told a remarkable story. Her ex-husband Jack Mossop, who died in a psychiatric institution in 1942, had allegedly confessed to her in a disturbed state that he and a man known only as Van Ralt had encountered a Dutch woman, gotten her extremely drunk, and then, whether accidentally or deliberately, she had died. Panicked, they had placed her body in the tree in Hagley Wood. Jack Mossop, according to Una, was never able to forget the image of the woman's face in the hollow of the tree, and it had driven him to madness. Una Mossop came forward with this story years after the fact. Jack Mossop was dead. Van Ralt was never conclusively identified. The story could not be verified or disproven. What investigators could say with reasonable confidence was this: whoever Bella was, she was almost certainly not local in the traditional sense, or at least, she did not have local family who claimed her. She may have been a displaced person, a refugee, a woman living on the margins of wartime society, someone whose disappearance would not be reported because no one in England felt responsible for reporting it. The war created thousands of such people, individuals unmoored from their homes, their families, their records, moving through a country under blackout conditions where asking too many questions about strangers was not always encouraged. In 1953, the graffiti reappeared on the Wilkes-Barre obelisk, an 18th century landmark near Hagley Wood itself. WHO put Bella down the Wych Elm, spray painted at the base of the monument, a message seemingly directed back at the place it all began. It has been repainted and scrubbed away and repainted again, so many times over the years that the original stone beneath it has been permanently altered. As recently as 2016, the message appeared again. Someone somewhere has not let this go. That persistence is its own kind of haunting. It suggests that someone or a community of someones across generations believes the answer exists, that Bella's name is known, that the person or persons responsible may have lived out their lives in those Midlands towns, walking past their neighbors, attending church, watching their children grow up, and carrying the knowledge of what was put inside that tree on a cold night in 1941. The Witch Elm still stands in Hagley Wood, though it is much diminished now, hollowed further by time and by the decades of visitors who have come to see it. The estate is private, but that hasn't stopped people. They come from all over England and from further afield. They stand at the tree and they look into the hollow and they try to understand how something like this happens. How a woman's entire existence can be erased so completely that 80 years later, the world still doesn't know her real name. Bella. Just Bella, no last name, no confirmed nationality, no family who ever came forward, no justice. Only a hollow in an old tree in the English countryside and a piece of taffeta that someone put in a dead woman's mouth and graffiti that keeps coming back no matter how many times someone tries to erase it. WHO put Bella down the Wych Elm. The tree knows, and so far it hasn't told.